Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first IAS Thursdays of 2023. We are incredibly excited to kick off this semester with the long-awaited celebration of Jennifer Gunn, our former director, and welcome to Bianet Castellanos, our new director. I am Susanna Smith. I'm the managing director for the Institute of the Institute for Advanced Study. And we will do our best to offer descriptions of what you might see on stage and on your screen today. And that includes me. I am a woman of European descent with short hair in a blue turtleneck. IAS Thursdays is a regular event series that brings a wide range of ideas, conversations, and viewpoints to the heart of the University of Minnesota. I open this celebration today by acknowledging that the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus, where I'm standing right now, is on the ancestral and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. Land acknowledgements are just a beginning for respectfully recognizing the Dakota people's history on this land and their sovereignty. The IAS is actively revising our statement to concretely outline our commitment to working with tribal nations to affirm tribal sovereignty, reckon with this painful past, and counter historical and contemporary injustices. At the IAS, we see the work of supporting communities of color as inseparable from supporting our Indigenous relatives and colleagues. Our commitments at the IAS include advocating for racial justice, strengthening our work with the communities around us, and creating pathways for institutional transformation with the aim of building an anti-racist, anti-colonial, and inclusive university that disavows white supremacy and racism. For my part, as an administrator, I am committed to using my skills and knowledge to put these commitments into real action. And this includes our support for community organizations that directly engage issues of racial justice, such as the George Floyd Global Memorial, and our work with the Truth Project, or toward recognition and university tribal healing. We are committed to working alongside our relatives to dismantle the systems that seek to do harm, to sharing power, and to building a just university together. Now, a few brief announcements. We hope that you will join us for our next event on Thursday, February 9, a collaboration with the Creative Writing Program featuring acclaimed trans poet and critic Stephanie Burt. And also, proposals for IAS research and creative collaboratives are due this coming Monday, February 6th. We encourage potential applicants to take a look at our updated funding priorities for this program. And I would also like to remind everyone that all IAS Thursdays, including this one, include professional captioning. We recommend that online attendees view captions by clicking the Steam text link shared via the chat or scan the QR code on the screen. We will have a microphone today for audience members in this room, and you will also all be able to use Slido to facilitate our Q&A today. You can use your smartphone to scan the QR code displayed on screen, or go to www.slido, that's SLIDO.com, and enter the code IAS Thursdays, no space, to submit your questions. And please know that in order to respond to as many questions as possible, we may occasionally combine related questions. All right. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce today's honored guests. And in the interest of not standing up here for another 20 minutes, I'm not going to say everything that could be said about them, but the IAS things that can be said about them. Bianet Castellanos has a long history with the IAS. She was a faculty fellow in 2013, served on the IAS advisory board from 2015 through 18. She was appointed the IAS's third director in 2022. And in addition to her dedication to the IAS, Bianet serves as chair of the Department of American Studies. She's affiliate faculty in American Indian Studies, Chicano and Latino Studies, Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies, and the Interdisciplinary Center for the Study of Global Change. She is CLA Scholar of the College and a distinguished university teaching professor. Jennifer Gunn served as director of the IAS for 8 years, from 2014 to 2022. Before that, she was an IAS residential faculty fellow in 2008 and a collaborative convener. She is also History of Medicine endowed professor and served for 8 years as director of the program in the History of Medicine. In 2021, Jennifer received the President's Award for Outstanding Service. And if you want to hear more about the reasons that Jennifer is deeply beloved by IAS staff and others, please join us after this program for a reception. For some reason, they're going to give me the microphone again, and I will probably be a little more, a little less formal. And yeah, and we're you know, really want to try and make Jennifer cry, so we'll see how that goes. And so with no further ado, I bring you Jennifer Gunn and Bianet Castellanos.
Welcome, everyone. We're delighted to have you all here with us this evening. Welcome, Jennifer. I'm thrilled to be here with you. You know, this conversation that we're about to have is really a way for us to reflect on the work that you've done, the legacy you've built here at the IAS. You and your predecessor, Ann Waltner, built a thriving, dynamic institute. And so I'm really excited to hear about, you know, your reflections on leadership, on interdisciplinarity, and on collaboration. So I'd like to begin with the first question. When you stepped into the role of director, what key interdisciplinary concerns drove your initial efforts at the IAS?
Well, the very first thing that drove my concerns about at the IAS was actually, how can I ever succeed Ann Waltner? But I think there were a couple of things. One was really thinking about the practical differences in the ways in which disciplines work, particularly across the sciences and engineering and the professional schools and the humanities and humanistic social sciences and arts. And so one of my concerns was to think about how we understand that the ways we work are actually different, not just our intellectual methodologies or our questions, but you know, our reward systems, et cetera, are somewhat different. And think about what we needed to do to try to bring together disciplines in the process of generation, in the initial conception and design of a project. So I think that was one thing. I mean, history of science, technology, and medicine sits at that kind of intersection. And so it was something that seemed sort of obvious to me. I think another one was figuring out how to help introduce and broker relationships across the university's many colleges and disciplines, because as you know, we're somewhat balkanized. and that's a real challenge in a huge institution to try to know what's going on across so many different units that communicate more internally than across silos, so to speak. And then I think part of that was just thinking about how do we take advantage of where the IAS sits in the university. So it sits in an interstitial space. It reports to the provost. It's not under a single college. We're responsible for all 5 system campuses. And that is figuring out how do we leverage that to make interdisciplinary collaborative work really more possible. And that actually making the IAS a space for innovation and recognizing that we can take risks that other people that we're outside of college demands, and that we can take risks in a way that others don't. I think that was that's something that I continue to really value and care about. And then in a very practical sense, who knew that I was such a bureaucrat? Avoiding duplication and competition in the ways that the academy kind of wastes our human resources.
Yeah, I mean, all the different programming that you've done over the years has been really amazing, because it does cover, connect the system And also it really does also offer really new opportunities for thinking about different ideas. So what I'd like to ask you now is to, think about, to ask you if you could talk about some of those ideas, some of those collaborations, which were the ones that surprised you or delighted you the most?
So honestly, it's the part that has been the most fun is all the ideas that people bring to us. And then I think, what has been actually a huge part of the delight is that the IES has this incredible staff that are all grossly overqualified for their jobs. And they bring their own personal commitments and skill sets to this process. So what the IAS, the delighting part is when things work, that somebody brings us an idea that we can help brainstorm, that we can help broker relationships and bring something really to fruition and make it work. So I think that's been, in a sense, one of my biggest delights overall. And I would say, some of the projects that I would just mention where the IES has kind of served as a convener and an incubator and then handed off. One would be this dissertation proposal development program where a lot of different people from CLA and in particular came together, and we were able to kind of pilot it and then hand it off. The Humanities Without Walls Career Diversity Workshop, which will be happening here this summer. And then the mega creative projects that are everybody else's efforts, but that the IAS can help stitch together, like the Minnesota Transform Just Futures project. So I think those are particular things. I would also say, one of the things I didn't actually think about that consciously coming into this is what a pleasure it would be to collaborate across system campuses. And so the Mellon Environmental Stewardship Place and Community Initiative has involved, it's largely Indigenous faculty led across the Duluth and Morris and Twin Cities campuses. And that's been really a major delight. See, I had to make notes because gosh knows I can't talk enough by myself. And I think that there were shorter term things that we did trying to figure out how do we get people to expand their networks, to meet people, and to get some of the wonderful experience that a residential fellowship is, but that residential fellowships don't always work well for some of the disciplines. And so I think the 5x5 groups, the land grant, land grab, and water equity and justice short-term fellowships, and things that we did in partnering with groups like the Water Council or INE, or another project that I personally love that was started by other people, the Human in the Data program. So Karen Sutausig and Claudia Newhauser and Karen Ho were key in creating that, but then the IAS was able to sustain it. So those are some of the things.
Wow, you can just hear all the breadth and the scope of the projects that you've instigated, and having participated in the dissertation proposal development program and also in the career diversity workshop. I can attest to how important those projects are, and also the reach that they have, right? I've had a number of students join and work in that program, and then I've also listened to a lot of students who participated in the career diversity workshop and talked about how important it was for them in shaping, their future, right? So we think about the legacy that you've built is really, really amazing. So I'd actually like to now talk to you about your thoughts on interdisciplinary collaboration and how it's changing. So especially as scholars engage with community partners to address some of today's most pressing issues. So if you could just, talk a little bit about that, how you see interdisciplinary collaboration changing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think one of the things is that there's more openness and discipline among the disciplines in the colleges, I think, in a general sense, to understanding the value of interdisciplinarity to their own work or to seeing their own work as inherently interdisciplinary. And when I came in, I kind of had more than one moment of panic about how ideas that the IAS had developed under Ann Waltner, like the research and creative collaboratives, a lot of colleges had adopted some of those ideas, and it was kind of like, oh great, what are we gonna do next? But it was a good challenge to think about what else was needed. And what I think it made us think about our interdisciplinary programming in a different way. And one was to think about how can we make our programming have legs for the future, not just be some actually absolutely fabulous one-off kinds of programs. I've heard amazing speakers as part of Thursdays at 4, as it was, and now IAS Thursdays. But thinking about how we can bring programming together and the focus on interdisciplinarity in a way that is building more lasting relationships and kind of legs and not duplicating efforts. And then I think as a university as a whole, many of us are beginning to think about what it really means to have a community partner, and that community engaged scholarship, that we recognize community knowledge as a kind of discipline in and of as the equivalent of a disciplinary knowledge. And I think trying to think about ways in which we can make the IAS one of the university's sort of public-facing portals with sort of porous boundaries to pull together the larger community in the university. I think that began for me to change my thinking about what interdisciplinarity really is. And I guess those would be the main things I would say.
I recall that when I served on the IAS board many years ago, that community engagement was a key issue that you wanted to further develop, but it was really challenging to do so. And so could you talk a little bit about the evolution of when you began, what were some of the challenges or struggles in being able to bring community partners fully into collaboration here at the IAS?
So I think one of them is just that bringing community partners in depends on the faculty and staff and people within the university who have those relationships already or who want to build those relationships. And so that, actually I think somebody asked me once, who are the IAS's community partners? And the reality is that our community partners are through all of our other partners. And it wasn't like we were building targeted community partnerships with particular organizations, but we were trying to create the conditions for community engagement. I will never forget an IAS Thursday panel that we had like 8 faculty and staff members talking about their own community engaged work. And at one point, Michelle Allen in Family and Community Medicine said, well, you have to be able to give up control of your budget. And there was just this audible gasp around the room. But that was a really important panel for me because it really brought together different ways that people were engaged in scholarship with the community. They talked about their relationships. They talked about how they built those trust and those relationships and the role of their partners as equal partners in the research, with the community driving the goal and the university trying to be an equitable partner in sharing resources. So I feel like through all of these, all of these pies that the IAS has had kind of a finger in some way, we've learned a lot from our community partners about how we can be better partners, how the university can be a more equitable partner, what it really means to listen and let community goals drive the initiatives. And so certainly in the Environmental Stewardship Grant, in the Office of Public Engagement's Decolonization Roundtable, we've learned a lot. And then I would say from increasingly having community partners as part of our regular programming, it means that we've opened up a lot of our programming to community participants, as well as all kinds of categories of people within the university. So like the research and creative collaboratives, the 5x5s, and the Scholars and Artists in Residence program. So.
Thank you.
Okay, so Now I get to ask the questions. And I just want to say that I was so thrilled when Bianet agreed to be the director of the IAS. One, because I knew she already knew the IAS. Two, because she has this vast experience and and she's also fun. I think that makes a difference. She and the IAS staff managed having the roof fall in on them, very with great equanimity. And so I want to know, why did you want this job? Because you actually probably had enough sense to know that it had its challenges.
Well, I was actually, when you first, talked to me about this position, I was in awe. I was like, I can't do this job. Like, look at everything you've done. And so she talked me into it. But really it comes down to my experiences with the IAS. I was an IAS fellow, and, I loved coming to the IAS. There was this wonderful community, a very collegial community, people who spent time listening to your ideas and helped you think beyond, the scope of your project. And I recall, like, when I was a fellow, I was working on my recent book project. And so that project came out of conversations that I had with my colleagues and with the staff here at the IAS. And it really, pushed me to create a book that was, that looked, for example, I hadn't even thought about the legal aspect of my work. And so that was one of the ideas that I was, talked into considering and to basically reframe my work around thinking about legal frameworks. And so that was really important to me. And then also when I was on the board, we grappled with this issue of how do we bring in community partners. And so for me, thinking about those experiences of being in this wonderful environment, and also thinking about how I could help support and expand community partnerships through the IAS, those were two things that were really important to me. And so it was exciting to then say, well, okay, I could step into this role and be able to do that kind of work here, and to be able to build, to continue to build that wonderful community, and then also expand those community partnerships.
So to put you on the spot and to say that if somebody had asked me even 4 months into my directorship what were my priorities for the IAS, I was still so awed by Anne's accomplishments that I don't think I could have said. But I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you anyway. Can you talk about what your priorities are for the IAS moving forward?
Yeah. So my priorities for the IAS really stem from my own experiences as a scholar and also as a Chicana feminist. So, one of my priorities, for example, is a commitment to racial justice, and to basically creating programming and promoting collaborations around racial justice. And again, that is rooted in my own experiences. I grew up, my parents are farm workers in California's San Joaquin Valley. And so, they did backbreaking work. I spent summers working in the fields. And so for me, the idea of creating a society where everyone can live with dignity is really, really important. And so when I talk about racial justice, it's not just a commitment based on the tragedies that have happened here around police violence in the Twin Cities and across the nation, and also taking place globally, right? But it's about also my experiences growing up and working in conditions that were, incredibly difficult. And so that's one of my priorities. Another priority I have is the priority around community engagement. And again, that is rooted in not only in the time that I spent on the IS board, but also in the work that I've done here in the Twin Cities. I spent 5 years working, serving on the board of El Colegio High School. And so I got to be engaged and talk to folks about the real challenges of being connected to the university. El Colegio is a community partner with the Department of Chicano and Latino Studies. And what does it mean to be a community partner? What does it mean to work with a university that has historically had extractivist, tendencies with local communities? And so how do we basically rectify those historical injustices, and also how do we then move forward in ways that are equitable and that allow people, communities to feel that the university is invested in them, and that their local knowledge is just as important as the knowledge that academics bring to the table. So that was part of the reason. That's one of my other commitments. And then I'm also committed to expanding our relationships with global partners. And so again, I do work in Mexico. So for me, thinking about those collaborations is also important, but also there's just some tremendous work being done here in the university. And so to be able to build on that capacity and to the pandemic showed us how we are a global community. And so thinking about how do we actually then mobilize those partnerships and build better relationships is really important. And especially since a lot of the issues that we're dealing with here in the United States are global issues. And so, I think the IAS has done tremendous work around water, around climate change. And so I'd like to be able to continue building on that work. And I think it's also another way to be able to tie in, the campuses and to think about how we, develop projects that are system-wide. And so and then the final priority is to then mobilize all these different projects and ideas so that we can actually create institutional transformation that, once again, moves us towards a more just society.
So I think that one of the things that we're both really interested in, and where, again, the IAS can play a unique role, is that sort of thinking about institutional transformation, because we're at a moment of great challenges, but also real opportunities in a way. And I think that a lot of the people who come to the IAS, who we've worked with, and they think in that big picture institutional sense. How do we not just make this a better University of Minnesota, but how do we think about the academy writ large and what our social role is, and how can we change that so that it is really even more critical, in a sense, to building a just society. So I totally agree with all those goals, and I'm glad you have to do the work.
Well, I'll be calling on you. I already do. We have lots of, check-in sessions. So I'd like to ask you, what's next for you? You've built this wonderful legacy, and so what are your plans?
Well, so actually, I think one of the things that I learned most from the IAS staff was that you don't have to do things alone. So it's collaboration in doing things, and collaboration, as I think about my own research project, and some things are more sort of content specific in a way, things I've learned at the IAS. I started a book long before I came to the IAS, and now I don't think what I originally thought about that book is going to work. I have to rethink that because I've had the benefit of listening to and learning from so many scholars over the last 8 years. I think I really like building things, so I know I'm going to keep thinking about building things. I'm probably going to drive my colleagues in history of medicine crazy because I tend to say yes, and then they're going to have to do the work. So, rethinking sort of medicine and health humanities, issues of structural racism in healthcare and in my own discipline, and I think how to think about becoming more community engaged in terms of my own research and teaching. So I have a whole year sabbatical, which is an incredible luxury, and I'm going to actually try to draft that long, lingering book on the history of rural health and medicine.
That's terrific. And remember, we are also happy to collaborate with you here at the IAS as you develop these projects. So, like you said, you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, that's really true.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for this opportunity to have this conversation. And so we'd like to open it up for questions from the audience.
All right, well, let us first thank you for this conversation. This is really great. And can I just say, it makes my heart sing to hear you two, to think about what we have done and earlier under Ann Waltner as well, and what we may be doing, and, gives my life meaning too. So thank you both so much. Okay. We do have a microphone for audience members. Skylar will be out in the audience with the microphone, so raise your hand if you have a question. You are also welcome to submit your questions via Slido. You can use your smartphone to scan the QR code displayed on screen, or go to www.slido, that's SLIDO.com, and enter the IAS Thursdays to submit your question. And how do I get into this? It's empty.
I learned a lot about technology at the IAS. And one of the things I learned is that you really need professional tech people.
Thank you, Carolina. Okay, we have some questions. So let's start. How has the IAS and how will the IAS address issues of climate change?
Well, we are very excited to, for example, we're putting together our 5x5s right now. And so in the 5x5s, we are thinking about how we can incorporate climate change as an idea that would spark conversations across the university. So that's one example. But we have some wonderful projects that are going on here at the IAS. And so, the project that Jennifer's involved with MESPAC is doing that important work. And so, one of the things about the IAS is that we invite ideas. So those of you who are in the audience who have ideas about how we can further address climate change, we're also happy to hear them. We think about our speaker series is also an opportunity for us to bring in people who are talking about how we can address these issues. So that's one way we're thinking about it. And would you like to talk a little bit more about MESPAC?
So the Mellon Environmental Stewardship Place and Community Initiative has really been trying to look at, among other things, indigenous and diverse ways of knowing that aren't normally incorporated into the humanities, and thinking about how can we regularize the incorporation of other kinds of knowing, and particularly around issues of environmental stewardship and environmental justice. And while that grant is formally, and the grant activities are formally coming to an end in June, with a lot of big bang events at the end of the semester, a capstone symposium, a humanities futures workshop for undergraduates, and some work around a summer institute on global indigeneity centered around the Great Lakes. Those sorts of things we're now sort of saying, okay, how do we create sustainability for this? And one of them is thinking about humanities futures, little hands-on, out in the community, if at all possible, courses where students are really, really looking at and thinking about the issues of climate change in an experiential kind of way, and not just in the classroom.
And stay tuned for more on those capstone events, some of which will be featured in IAS Thursdays. We have a question in the house. Yes? No? Yes. Okay.
Thanks. Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you. I have a question related to, for both of you, I guess. How do you envision the role of the IAS in this, especially in this moment of potential transformation, in terms of labor advocacy around people working in universities and the sort of like shifting landscape towards adjunct and non-tenure track positions? Yeah, thank you.
Want me to?
That's a great question. I mean, I think what we do, the IAS is really an incubator, right? And an opportunity for us to rethink these issues. And so, I welcome the opportunity for folks to come in and talk about how do we re-envision labor here at the university. It's a really important issue. I know that there's been a lot of advocacy work done around unionization that hasn't, come to fruition in the way we would like it to. So I think this is, we have resources to be able to bring people together and have these conversations and to advocate as well, right? And so I think this is part of what we do. We're not just an incubator, we're also an advocate for on behalf of, research projects and also the people who work here at the university, right? So we definitely I see our role as being able to, create the space for us to rethink these issues. And so thank you for bringing this issue to the forefront here.
And I think one of the things we've done in the past is, with the exception of the faculty residential fellowship, all of the IS programming is open to everybody. And I know that we had this sort of scholars and artists in residence program, but that wasn't really funded. And so that was a place where staff and contingent faculty could be part of the fellowship, but what does it mean if it doesn't have money? And one of the things I know that Bianet has been doing is trying to figure out how do we make sure that we make opportunities like this funded. And I think the other thing is that as we think about, what is the future of the academy moving forward, to me, as a faculty person training grad students, I believe that there are a lot of things people can do besides become a faculty member with a PhD, but they have to want to do those things, and they shouldn't be frozen out of the academy, and we shouldn't have a double standard. It's our responsibility as faculty to advocate for those permanent jobs and for rethinking how we do that work so that the rewards of the work and the burden of the work are shared more collaboratively. And I think that, when I think about some of the work that Kevin Murphy and Jigna Desai are doing, around sort of academic abolitionism, that's not the right word for it, but those kinds of things are again, beginning to say, let's really think outside the box for how we rethink the work of the university in the future. Dealing with very common practical problems like, okay, the traditional learning population at the university is demographically shrinking right now. And, what do people need to know if we think about the issue of lifelong learning? And yes, who's going to teach those people? And how are we going to be producing new knowledge? So, yeah.
Well, I think our next question follows up really nicely. What does institutional transformation mean in this context? That is, what types of transformation are you looking towards? Can you talk about which issues, areas, concerns that the IAS is interested in addressing?
That's also another terrific question. I think, one of the, for example, one of the main concerns that we've been addressing this year is we've been working in collaboration with the Truth Project about thinking about, the historical legacy of the university's dispossession of indigenous people's lands, right? And thinking about how do we, support the Truth Project as they move forward to rectify and address that really that situation. And so I think that's part of when we think about institutional transformations is looking at the historical legacies of this institute, of this university, and seeing, addressing them, bringing it to light, right? That's another part of it. It's like there's so much of it, so many things that have happened over time. We just haven't really talked about them. And so calling attention to those disparities, and at the same time then we're saying, okay, then once we call attention to them, then how do we then actually address them? So that's one issue. The other issue is, also paying attention to the fact that we are in an institution that is a neoliberal institution. And so that means that, there have been these transformations in the academy that haven't necessarily always been to the benefit of the faculty, the staff, and the students. And so thinking about how we can then address those in ways that do benefit faculty, staff, and students. And so, we are the university that educates, the bulk of the students here in Minnesota. And so We have to make sure that the work that we do here, is going to be supporting those students, and at the same time is going to create an environment where faculty and graduate students and students can do the work that they want to do. And sometimes the universities, these changes to the academy don't always necessarily make that possible. So that's part of it. And again, we invite lots of ideas on how we can make this happen. And so I invite you all to come and share your ideas. We have research collaboratives that we offer every, like for example, I think Monday is, what day?
Due on Monday.
Monday. Yes.
Midnight Monday.
So, and this is an opportunity for people to come together and, to actually think about these questions and to be able to make this, those changes happen. So those are just some. I can't cover everything, but just to give you a sense of what we're thinking.
And I don't have to be careful about speaking for the IAS either. But I mean, one of the things I would say too is like, it's not just that we are dealing with what is our role in society in terms of racial and social justice. And I am sometimes just shocked by the presumption that there will be demographic change that will change the institutional structures, and I just don't think that's enough. And I'm not sure how people think demographic change will happen unless we change some of those structures up front. But I mean, I see in the sciences a lot of the same thing. Questions about replicability of research, ways in which the peer review system has had biases built in that have unfairly promoted, shall we say, certain ideas or certain groups of people. And so I think lots of the ways in which we do things are sort of up for reevaluation and reconsideration, particularly in the current political climate. So.
Do we have another?
Thanks. My question concerns, you both have talked about community engagement. And so I'm interested in how that can work in, I'm thinking of the polarized society that we have in the United States. And some people call it an urban-rural divide. Some people say it's the coastal areas against the vast middle. And another way people characterize it is educated elites and the resentment that other people have against those educated elites. So I wonder, so I think the university is probably the embodiment of an institution of the educated elites, and the name of the IAS might be the epitome of an alienating organization, and that's not meant to denigrate the IAS by any means, but I wonder if you can talk about ways that perhaps in terms of community engagement in past programs and looking ahead, you've thought of ways to engage communities that feel alienated from educated elites.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think what's really important is that the work that we're doing at the university is really relevant to all sectors of society. The challenge is disseminating that information in ways that's accessible, right? So accessibility is really important, and we think about that very much when we do our programming. And so like the programming that we're putting together for the coming year is we've thought about what does it mean to hold conversations that make them accessible. So we had, for example, in the fall, we had some programming around Indigenous mapping that was terrific. It was accessible. It was relevant to everyone. And so that's what we're thinking about. How do we make our programming accessible? How do we put together conversations that people want, that won't deter people from paying, listening to them? And then and we're also we have, for example, the fellows who are coming in the fall are a number of them are actually talking specifically about these political divides. So we're bringing in scholars who are very much invested in thinking about that. One of our current fellows, or our fellows this past fall, his work was about thinking about how who gets access to news and how do they get access to news. So that's the kind of work that we're interested in doing and promoting. And the question is like how do we create greater access to our programming? And by making our programs hybrid, we're able to do so. But we do have to be more proactive in disseminating that information. And so that people can listen to it and understand that this is the ivory tower it's in many ways it's a misnomer, because many of us are working and doing work in communities, right? And so we are part of communities. And so, but because of that, the idea that we are, academics, then it seems like our work isn't relevant, but it actually is very relevant to many communities. So the goal of the IAS is to be able to make that accessible.
And I knew you would ask a hard question, Fred. I mean, I think this issue about I think the IAS has always been a place to convene conversations, but how do you get people to be engaged in those conversations? And I think one of the things that really interested me about trying to think of the IAS as one of the sort of portals to the state, and with the university having a responsibility to the state, is that like some of our research and creative collaboratives have done, they're like the first step to how do you convene those conversations on the ground. So there was a research and creative collaborative in Morris that was it was like a film society kind of project. I'm not going to explain it well. But, I mean, Morris is pretty polarized, I think, between town and gown in a lot of ways. And it's also, a community on the front line, in a sense, in Minnesota of immigrant communities, strong religious-oriented groups in town, struggling with the disinvestment in rural America in a general sense. When there were unfortunate comments made by a Board of Regents member about the Morris student body, I just kept thinking to myself, what don't they understand about the fact that there's now no real shuttle service to Morris, and that you have to drive 90 minutes to get Starbucks if you really want Starbucks. All these issues that we get to see when we have collaboratives in Morris that are community and gown and town combined, and they're first steps. But I've been just hugely impressed, and with the work of other units like the extension and the Regional Sustainable Development Program, that there is that kind of work on the ground trying to bring people together to have those conversations, and that the extent to which we can use where we sit in the university to amplify that is great. But it is also, you're right, it's one of our hugest challenges.
I notice an interesting tension between the IAS doing work and the IAS creating conditions for work to happen and offering support for those projects. Can you talk more about that, what it means, and how one can access that support?
That question can be taken in so many different ways. So I will talk about it with regards to like our faculty fellowship program. And so, that's one of the tensions there is that, faculty come and spend time with us to be able to cultivate their ideas, to broaden those ideas, to finish projects. But then, they are also still teaching, or they're also still, like they have advisees or in committees, they're doing administrative work. And so there is a lot of tension in that regard. So I'll take it that way, but that may not be the way the question was intended.
I think, I don't know how to answer that question at one level, except to say that there's no way that as wonderful and some of our peer institutions would say large, as the IAS staff is, and the range of things we do, like Open Rivers, which is a project that we do more directly ourselves, But all of our online journal on water and place and community. But, you know, a lot of that is, I mean, working full time, there's no way the IAS staff could do all these things. So it is, how do we build a support system for other people in the university and in the community who don't have the same kinds of resources that the university does to do those things. And, you know, and that is the role of an incubator and an amplifier. And I think it's also the way that you make the work expand and make it sustainable. Because, and this kind of goes back to the question about, you know, the polarization in the community. What we really know is that when people get to know each other, they build trust and they build lasting relationships. And so the IAS is trying to build those lasting relationships across campus and across, and to support people in doing that work that is often not in their standard job description, shall we say. We know that community engaged scholarship takes a lot more work and a lot more time and a different kind of commitment than an archival project. And I personally love being in the archives and I love archival projects. But it is a different kind of scholarship and it takes a different kind of time and commitment. So I think the appropriate role for the IAS with the resources that we have, and you know, is that we provide that support that is not provided on a day-to-day basis, and the models for doing things differently that we are also not necessarily getting in our departments.
And a clarification of this question popped up. So that is such as large grants that the IAS supports and administrates, collaboratives, et cetera, funding vast amounts of other projects. So I don't know if you want to elaborate any further. But sort of like what the IAS itself, okay, I hope I'm getting this right, what the IAS itself decides to do, or the projects that IAS staff are asked to, that IAS staff are used to support?
So the IAS occasionally initiates something. We initiated the Environmental Stewardship Place and Community Initiative, but the Minnesota Transform Initiative came from other people, and we played a sort of supporting role in that. And there's a new Humanities Without Walls grant that Morris and White Earth are doing together around boarding school issues, which is super important. And you know, and so why do we even go out and get grants? Well, partly it's the currency of the current way the academy works, and partly is that it provides things that the university is not currently allocating its own resources for. So this boarding school grant in Morris, I mean, it is critically important that we as a state and as a university with a campus at Morris and our own campus, you know, reckon with the legacies of our past involvement in indigenous education and sort of incarceration in a way. And we can't move forward without acknowledging the past. But it's a very time-consuming process to go to the National Archives and identify who were the students at the Morris boarding school and where did they come from. And then working with communities and relatives and descendants to figure out how to address that trauma and how the communities want to address that trauma. So part of the IAS applying for grants or supporting other people to apply for grants and the massive amount of administration involved in that is about doing things that we can't yet, or that we're not already doing with internal university resources, which is not to say we couldn't decide to do those things, but it makes you know, again, it's kind of an incubation. $150,000 is not going to do all the work that needs to be done.
Could you talk a bit more about your commitment to global partnerships? How do you hope to build these relationships, and how does this global work align with or transform ideas of interdisciplinarity?
Yeah, that's also a great question. We're thinking about putting together a proposal for a Global Humanities Institute that the Consortium of Humanities Institutes and Centers has a call for Global Humanities Institutes, and they can be on different topics. And so one of the issues that we wanted to address is actually thinking about climate change and tourism. And so we're putting it together as a way to, because what the Institute will do is it will actually allow us to work with international partners. And so it's supposed to be based on collaborations with international partners, but will also allow us to train students to think about these issues. And so that's one example of how we would build international partnerships. We're also, one of our faculty received a Mellon grant to do a project on transnational policing. And so that's another way of thinking about how do we, foster international partnerships, is engaging with this issue of transnational policing and how police violence is transnationalized, is taken into context within I'm butchering their project, so I apologize. But how to think about policing in the transnational context. And so that's another example of sort of engaging with global partnerships. But there are so many different ways to do it. And so again, I invite you all, if you have ideas on how you would like to see this happen, come talk to us. And so that's one of the beauties of our staff is wonderful. They are incredibly supportive, but they're also, able to help take ideas and make them come to fruition by, we provide support for grant writing, we provide support for bringing people together into conversations with each other. And so that's part of what the IAS does. That's really special about this place.
Question from a human in the audience.
I have a question, but I wanted to say first that as a rank and file faculty member who has benefited, whose engaged programs have benefited from your leadership and IAS programming, I wanted to thank you very much for everything that you've done. I've seen in the description, the things that you've been describing, the programming, I've seen really tangible examples of how IAS under your leadership has translated to direct resources for things that would have otherwise not been done in the community, and I want people to know that. I've been in other R1s in the Big Ten, and the corresponding institutes for advanced studies in those places really come off as stuffy and not accessible. and
Bianet has style.
Early on here, it seemed like Minnesota was different in the commitment it gives to engaged research, and I wanted to attest in that regard that IAS, different from those other institutions, has been one of the places where I've seen the engaged research really flower. So I wanted to thank you for that. I have a question. And from the experiences that you've had with all of the programming, the administrating, the leveraging of grants and stuff like that, what do you think is the most important thing that this university has to do to really improve the working relations with Indigenous people?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's a huge question, right? and I hope I guess for me it's really important to build relationships. I think when I was talking about community engagement, right, this is part of what what's central to that is not only do we have to acknowledge this history, but we have to think about action. Like how do we actually translate that into action? And so part of what we're doing at the IAS is supporting projects that are intended to address this historical legacy with the university. And these are projects that are organized and run by Indigenous people, right? And so I think that's part of it, is being respectful of the fact that, you know, that our goal is to support and work in relationship, right? And to build good relationships. And so that's how I see our role at the IAS, is to build those good relationships and to follow the lead of how Indigenous scholars and leaders, how they see that, you know, what they see is needed in terms of building better relationships with the university.
And I guess I would say that so much of what the university is doing depends on your working 24/7, Vince, on, you know, on Anne's work on the Truth Project, on, you know, Joseph's work to support to support Minnesota Transformed, to support language revitalization, on Chris Pex's work on remapping the Dakota Oyate. But we need to move out of the project zone and into that more day-to-day relationship. And I had a conversation with a grad student who's teaching one of the Humanities Futures Labs today. And she said one of the things that came, and so most of the students in this class are Indigenous. One of the things she said, I never expected that they would be so excited about the idea of Indigenous curriculum. And that a lot of it was about, you know, how they are not having to go into the classroom and think with, you know, it's like code switching, think with one side of their brain and go home and think in a different way. And I think that you know, I think having the visions of what longer term and everyday relationships with Indigenous communities means for how we do transform the way we work, and that we get certain obstacles out of the way, thinking about how we share our resources. I think that, you know, that's part of it. And I think, you know, I am just humbled by the people that I have gotten to, okay, you are gonna make me cry. The people that I've gotten to know through the IAS. And part of it is just the people who are so passionate and so giving of their time in ways that don't count you know, or that the university doesn't really count or recognize in, you know, in those check boxes for promotion. You know, I hope you're getting promoted this year, Vince, but let me just say, the number of associate professors I know who are doing leadership and creative, interesting work to activate the university, what should be the entire university's commitment to community engagement. This is not the commitment of, or the responsibility of the Office of Public Engagement alone, or who are great partners, or the Extension Service, or the IAS alone. Every part of the university has a mission and a responsibility, you know, in our society. And so I think, you know, when we get to the point that we are not depending on very individualized kind of commitment and labor, but really embrace that commitment as an entire institution, that will make a change. And you all are doing all the work.
Well, we are out of time, which makes me very sad, because I know some of you still have questions. There's this amazing array of questions on Slido. I do want to read one thing, which is not a question, but I want to thank you both and everyone at the IAS for supporting such a range of projects and for fostering such a capacious understanding of advanced study. And I thank you, whoever wrote that comment. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today for this wonderful conversation. And thank you all for those of you who couldn't be here in person, but who joined us online. We will raise a glass in your honor when we go to our reception, which is out in the gallery, I want to bring to your attention, in the gallery is the exhibit Why Canoes. Thank you, Vince Diaz, for organizing that. And in anticipation of this reception, some of the objects were actually moved out of the gallery. So please don't just be back there. Go and check out some of the canoe-y stuff over here. And I just want to thank you both for your wonderful work, and thank you.
I'm only sorry that my mother did not live long enough to hear somebody define advanced study. That's the worst part about being the IAS director. Somebody will say, is it a branch of Princeton?
Yeah,
Or what is advanced study? I have no